Black Waitress sheltered a bleeding man in the storm, unaware he was a ruthless billionaire. So, hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was the kind of storm that felt like it could last forever. Rain battered the windows of Bayou Spoon, a small but cozy restaurant tucked away in New Orleans. The sound of the wind howling outside matched the unease inside, as the flickering lights cast long shadows over the empty tables. Naomi Carter, a waitress working her shift alone that night, was wrapping up, eager to go home. She hadn't expected the evening to end the way it did. The streetlights outside barely pierced through the sheets of rain when she heard the crash. Her eyes snapped to the front door, barely visible through the heavy downpour. A figure stumbled through, drenched and covered in blood. His clothes, once sharp and expensive-looking, were torn and blood-stained, as if he had been in a fight, or worse. Naomi froze for a second, her heart racing, as the man collapsed to the floor in front of her. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes barely stayed open. In that moment, Naomi didn't know who he was or why he was in this state. But one thing was clear. He needed help. The man's voice was barely audible, but he whispered urgently, "Please, don't let them find me." Naomi's instincts kicked in, overriding any thoughts of fear or hesitation. She rushed to him, checking for any signs of weapons or identification. There was nothing, just the metallic scent of blood and the faint smell of cologne clinging to his expensive suit. With quick movements, Naomi dragged him inside, locking the door behind her, sealing them both inside from the storm and whatever dangers lurked outside. The man was too weak to protest as she helped him to a chair in the corner, his hands trembling as they gripped the armrests. Naomi didn't know who this man was, but she knew one thing for sure. He was in trouble. And if no one else was going to help him, she was going to. She moved quickly, grabbing a towel and gently cleaning the blood off his face. His condition was bad. He had a gash above his eyebrow that seemed to be the worst of it, but there were bruises on his hands as if he had been in a struggle. His breathing was still shallow, but steady now. Naomi felt the weight of the moment settle in as she stepped back to survey the man. His expensive suit, his well-groomed hair. This was no ordinary person. He didn't belong here, in her small restaurant, sitting at the mercy of a waitress. The storm outside raged on, but inside, Naomi was alone with a man whose life she had just stepped into without a second thought. Little did she know, this stranger was far more than what he appeared to be. Naomi stood over the man, her heart pounding in her chest as she wiped the blood from his face. The storm outside was unrelenting, but inside the restaurant, it was silent except for the sound of his shallow breathing. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She didn't know this man, but something in his eyes told her that he was someone important, someone who needed her help. She had no idea who he was or why he was so badly injured. But Naomi was a woman of action. She couldn't just leave him there, not like this. Naomi grabbed a towel and gently pressed it to his forehead, trying to stem the bleeding. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. Who could have done this to him? Why was he here, in her restaurant, with no one around to help him but her? She took a deep breath and spoke softly. "You're safe now. Just stay with me. I'll take care of you." The man's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at her with a mix of gratitude and confusion. His lips moved, but no words came out. Naomi leaned closer, trying to catch his breathless whispers. "Please, I can't let them find me," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. Naomi didn't know who they were, but she didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that he was in danger, and he was here, in her restaurant, bleeding and vulnerable. She couldn't let anyone hurt him. Naomi gently helped him sit up, supporting his weight as he leaned against the wall. The storm outside seemed to match the chaos in her mind. She knew she couldn't keep him here forever. The restaurant was closing, and soon, someone would come looking for him. But what if those people meant him harm? What if they were out there, waiting for him to be alone? Naomi had to make a decision. She looked around, thinking quickly. There was a small back door that led into the alley. It wasn't the best option, but it was something. She couldn't risk leaving him in the open, not with the way he looked. Too many people could recognize him. She took a deep breath and helped him to his feet, her hands steady despite the uncertainty. "We need to get you out of here," she said, her voice calm but firm. The man nodded weakly, still not able to speak properly. Naomi helped him toward the back door, glancing out into the pouring rain. There was no one in sight, but the storm made it hard to see clearly. She pushed open the door, and the cold air hit her like a slap in the face. She winced but kept going, supporting the man as they made their way down the alley. They had to move quickly. Naomi's heart was racing, and she could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins. She wasn't sure where they were going, but she couldn't stop now. As they reached the end of the alley, the man stumbled, nearly falling. Naomi steadied him, her grip firm on his arm. "Come on," she urged, trying to keep him moving. They reached a small, run-down hotel not far from the restaurant. Naomi pushed open the door and helped him inside, her mind still racing. The man slumped onto a nearby chair, his breathing labored. Naomi quickly ran to the front desk, asking the clerk for a room. She didn't have much money on her, but she was desperate. She needed to get him somewhere safe. The clerk looked at her suspiciously, but after a moment, he handed her a key. She hurried back to the man, helping him up and guiding him to the room. Once inside, Naomi locked the door behind them and helped him lie down on the bed. She wasn't sure what to do next. She had no idea who this man was, but something in her gut told her he wasn't just some random stranger. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was someone important. His clothes, his accent, the way he carried himself, all of it screamed wealth and power. But that didn't matter to Naomi. She wasn't interested in his status. She just wanted to help him, to make sure he was safe. The man lay there, eyes closed, breathing a little easier now. Naomi sat by the bed, keeping a watchful eye on him. She couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. Her life, her world, was about to be flipped upside down in ways she couldn't even imagine. Naomi sat by the window, watching the rain as it poured relentlessly outside. The storm hadn't slowed down, and neither had the heavy thoughts swirling in her mind. She had gotten the man to safety, but now what? Who was he, really? Naomi didn't ask for much in life. All she wanted was a little peace, to get through the day, work her shifts, and take care of the things that mattered most. But the night had taken a sharp turn. The man she had helped, he wasn't just some random stranger. There was something about him that screamed power, and Naomi couldn't ignore the feeling that he was someone important. She couldn't help but wonder who he was. As if on cue, the man stirred in the bed behind her. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at her with a mixture of confusion and gratitude. His voice was still raspy, but he managed to whisper, "You saved my life." Naomi turned around, meeting his gaze. She didn't know how to respond. "You were bleeding. You needed help," she said simply, her voice steady, though her heart was still racing. The man sat up slowly, wincing in pain. Naomi quickly helped him adjust the pillows behind his back. "I didn't know where else to go," he continued, his voice shaky. "I didn't think anyone would help me." Naomi frowned slightly. "Why would you think that?" He glanced at her, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to soften. "Because of who I am," he said quietly, almost as if it pained him to admit it. Naomi raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" The man took a deep breath and looked away, as if trying to gather his thoughts. He didn't speak for a long time. Naomi waited, her mind still reeling. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low. "I'm Ethan Monroe, the CEO of Monroe Tech." Naomi blinked, processing his words. Monroe Tech was one of the biggest tech firms in the country. It was well known for its innovative products and its ruthless business practices. Ethan Monroe was a name that even Naomi had heard of, even if she didn't follow the business world. She had no idea why someone like him would end up in a storm-ravaged alley, but now she understood why he had seemed so out of place in her small restaurant. Naomi stood there, unsure of what to say. Ethan was silent for a moment, then looked back at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't think anyone like you would help me," he said. Naomi shook her head slightly. "I don't care who you are. You needed help." Ethan smiled faintly, though there was a sadness in his expression. "I know I owe you. More than you'll ever understand." Naomi's mind raced. She had done what anyone with a decent heart would do, help someone in need. But now that she knew who he was, she didn't know what to think. Ethan Monroe had spent his career building an empire, a reputation for being cutthroat and ruthless. He had made millions, but at what cost? And yet, here he was, lying in a stranger's bed, vulnerable and thankful. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to push aside the confusion in her mind. She wasn't interested in his wealth or status. She just needed to figure out what to do next. "You're going to need medical attention," she said, her tone practical. "You can't stay here forever." Ethan nodded, his face contorting slightly with pain. "I know. I don't know where to go. I've burned so many bridges." Naomi paused, considering his words. She had heard the rumors about Monroe Tech, about the way Ethan had climbed to the top by stepping on anyone who got in his way. But here he was, broken, lost in a way that she hadn't expected. Naomi wasn't sure what to do. She didn't know what kind of man he was beyond the news reports and the stories that had followed his company. But something about him felt different in this moment. Maybe it was the vulnerability in his eyes or the way he had looked to her for help. Naomi wasn't sure, but she had made her decision. "I'll take you to the hospital," she said firmly. "You need someone who can help you." Ethan looked up at her, his face a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You would do that?" Naomi nodded. "I don't have a lot of answers, but I can get you the help you need." She stood up, walking over to the door to gather her things. She wasn't sure where this would lead, or what Ethan's story truly was, but she knew one thing. She had given him a chance, and she wasn't going to leave him to face whatever came next alone. Naomi helped Ethan out of the small hotel room, the weight of the night still hanging over her. The storm had finally begun to ease, but the tension in her chest only seemed to grow. She wasn't sure what to expect when they reached the hospital, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't just leave him there. Ethan's wounds were more than just physical. There was something deeper, a heaviness in his eyes that spoke volumes. As they walked out into the street, Naomi kept a steady pace, her grip on his arm firm but gentle. Ethan, despite his earlier insistence, seemed to weaken with each step. He had been through something, and Naomi had the sinking feeling that it was far from over. Ethan's breathing was shallow, and his face, pale under the dim streetlights, showed signs of exhaustion. He glanced at Naomi, his voice soft but filled with a tinge of regret. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he said quietly. Naomi didn't reply at first. She wasn't interested in his past. She was focused on getting him the help he needed. But she couldn't ignore the sincerity in his voice. "We all have," she finally said. "What matters now is that you get better." He nodded, his eyes dropping to the ground. Naomi could tell he was holding something back, but she didn't push. She didn't know the man behind the name, the Ruthless Billionaire CEO, the face that had built an empire at the cost of countless others. All she knew was that, in this moment, he was just a man, vulnerable and in need of help. They reached the hospital within minutes, the bright lights of the emergency room casting a harsh contrast to the stillness of the night. Naomi helped Ethan inside, guiding him to the front desk. The nurse at the counter looked up, her expression neutral, but the moment she saw Ethan, her eyes widened. "Mr. Monroe?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Ethan gave a weak nod, his voice barely a whisper. "I need help." The nurse immediately sprang into action, calling for a doctor while Naomi held Ethan steady. The urgency of the situation shifted, and before long, he was whisked away into a treatment room. Naomi stood there, her mind racing. She hadn't expected things to escalate this quickly, but here they were. She had no choice but to stay. Ethan had trusted her enough to bring him to the hospital, and now it was her turn to be there for him. Naomi took a seat in the waiting area, her legs aching from the long night. She didn't know how long she'd been sitting there, but it felt like hours. Her mind kept going back to what Ethan had said earlier. "I've made a lot of mistakes." The words kept echoing in her mind. Ethan Monroe was a man who had everything: wealth, power, influence, but he had also lost something along the way. Naomi didn't know if she could help him fix those mistakes, but she knew she couldn't walk away now. The doors to the treatment room finally opened, and a doctor came out, his face serious but calm. Naomi stood up, her heart racing. "He's stable," the doctor said, catching Naomi's gaze. "He's going to be okay, but we'll need to keep him here for observation for a while." Naomi breathed a sigh of relief. At least he was going to make it. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight with emotion. The doctor nodded. "We've cleaned him up, but there are a few more tests we need to run. We'll update you shortly." Naomi nodded and followed the doctor's gaze toward the hallway. She knew there was more to Ethan's story than just the injuries he had sustained. But for now, she would take what she could. She had done what was right, and that was all that mattered. As she waited for updates on Ethan's condition, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that her life, and his, had just taken an unexpected turn. The man she had saved in the storm wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was someone she'd never forget. And for better or worse, their paths had crossed for a reason. Naomi wasn't sure what that reason was, but as she sat in the sterile waiting room, she knew one thing. Things were never going to be the same. Naomi sat in the sterile waiting room, the sound of the clock ticking loudly in the silence around her. The fluorescent lights above buzzed, adding to the tension that hung thick in the air. It had been hours since she had brought Ethan to the hospital, and despite the relief that he was stable, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. She had helped him. She had done the right thing. But now, she was left with so many questions. What happened to him? Who was after him? And most importantly, what did this mean for her? Naomi's mind raced as she stared at the floor, her fingers nervously tapping on her phone screen. She had no idea what Ethan was going through, but she knew it wasn't just about the injury he had sustained. There was a bigger story behind all of this. And as much as she wanted to ignore it, she couldn't. The door to the waiting room finally opened, and Naomi looked up to see the doctor standing in the doorway. His expression was neutral, but Naomi could see the seriousness in his eyes. "Ms. Carter," he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Monroe is awake. You can see him now." Naomi stood up quickly, her heart racing as she followed the doctor down the hall. The sterile smell of antiseptic mixed with the hum of fluorescent lights as they walked through the quiet corridors. They finally reached a private room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and Naomi could hear the soft sound of breathing inside. The doctor knocked gently before entering, giving Naomi a brief moment to prepare herself. Ethan was sitting up in the bed, his eyes closed, but he looked better than he had before. The color had returned to his face, and his breathing was steadier. He looked up as Naomi entered, a faint smile forming on his lips. "You came back," he said, his voice rough but sincere. Naomi nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. She had been so unsure of how this moment would go, but seeing him awake and alive made everything feel a little more real. "Of course I came back," Naomi replied, her voice soft. "You needed help." Ethan's expression shifted. There was something in his eyes now, something Naomi couldn't quite place. He looked at her, his gaze intense, almost as if he were trying to read her. "I owe you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than you know." Naomi didn't know how to respond. She wasn't looking for repayment. She didn't need him to owe her anything. She had acted because it was the right thing to do. But something about his words made her uneasy. "You don't owe me anything," she said firmly. "I just helped because you needed it. Nothing more." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then lowered his gaze. "I don't deserve your help," he said, his voice tinged with regret. Naomi shook her head, stepping closer to the bed. "You don't have to apologize," she said. "You're here, and you're safe. That's what matters." Ethan's eyes met hers again, and this time, she saw something different, an understanding. "You're not like the rest of them," he said quietly. Naomi didn't respond right away. She had no idea what he meant by that. The rest of them? Was he referring to his colleagues, the people he worked with, or something deeper? She couldn't be sure, but she didn't want to press him too much. "It's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to explain." There was a long silence between them, one filled with unspoken words and 1,000 questions neither of them knew how to ask. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice steady now. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "But I can't let this go." Naomi frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned back against the pillows, his eyes staring up at the ceiling. "The people who did this, they're not just after me. They're after everything I've built. And I can't just let them take it all away." Naomi's stomach tightened. She didn't know the full extent of Ethan's life, or his business, but she could tell that he was in more danger than she had realized. He wasn't just a man with a broken body. He was a man with a target on his back. She didn't know what kind of trouble he had gotten himself into, but she was sure it wasn't going to be easy to get out of. "What do you need from me?" Naomi asked, her voice steady. Ethan looked at her, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, he didn't say anything, but then, finally, he spoke. "I need your help," he said quietly. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. She had already done so much, but now it seemed like the stakes were higher than she had imagined. She wasn't sure what kind of help he needed, but one thing was clear. She couldn't just walk away now. She had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Naomi stood still, the weight of Ethan's words settling heavily in the room. The request, though quiet, felt like an undeniable pull. She had already helped him when he was bleeding on the floor, when he had no one. But now, standing in front of her, Ethan was asking for more. He wasn't just seeking medical help. He was asking her to be a part of a fight that he had been losing for some time. A fight with people who weren't afraid to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "What exactly are you asking for?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. Ethan's gaze met hers, intense and filled with determination. "I'm asking you to help me stop them," he said, his voice low. "The people after me, they're powerful. I can't do this alone. I need someone who understands what it's like to be overlooked, to be underestimated. Someone who isn't afraid to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost." Naomi's heart raced. She had no idea what kind of trouble Ethan had gotten himself into, but the way he spoke about these people, about the danger they posed, made her realize how deep this went. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was something bigger than both of them. "And you think I can help you with that?" Naomi asked, skepticism in her voice. Ethan nodded. "I've watched you," he said, his voice softening. "I've seen how you don't back down, how you stand up for what you believe in, even when the odds are against you. That's why I trust you." Naomi felt a twinge of doubt, but she also felt something else, a sense of responsibility. She wasn't the kind of person to turn her back on someone who needed her, and she certainly wasn't about to let Ethan face whatever was coming alone. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice firm now. Ethan paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as if weighing the next words carefully. "First, we need to make sure they can't find me. I've been hiding for too long, and I can't stay in one place for too long. But there's something else. I need to expose them for what they've done, what they're still doing." Naomi nodded, understanding now that this was more than just survival. This was about exposing corruption, about making sure the truth came to light, even if it meant risking everything. "You have a way to do that?" she asked, already knowing that the answer wasn't going to be simple. Ethan's eyes darkened. "I have evidence," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "But it's not just a matter of showing the evidence. It's about making sure they don't cover it up, that they don't silence me before I can do anything with it." Naomi didn't need to ask any more questions. She knew what was at stake now. This wasn't just about Ethan's safety. It was about righting the wrongs that had been done to so many. She could see the pain in his eyes, the toll that this battle had taken on him. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice determined. Ethan's expression softened. "We start by getting you out of here. I need you to be safe too, Naomi. If they find out you're helping me, they won't stop until they get to you." Naomi shook her head. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm not afraid." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with something that almost looked like admiration. "I didn't expect that," he said quietly. "But I'm glad you're with me." Naomi's heart thudded in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. She wasn't backing down. She had already crossed a line by helping Ethan. Now, she had to make sure he was safe, even if it meant risking everything she had. The doctor came in, interrupting the moment. "Mr. Monroe, we've finished with the tests," he said. "You're good to go, but we'll need you to follow up in a few days." Ethan nodded, his expression serious. He turned to Naomi, giving her a look that spoke volumes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a fight that could change everything. "We need to leave now," he said. Naomi followed him as they left the room, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty hospital corridor. She wasn't sure what they were walking into, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. Naomi and Ethan stepped out of the hospital, the night air cool against their skin. The rain had finally stopped, but the weight of the situation hung over them like a cloud. Naomi didn't know what would happen next, but she was committed now. There was no going back. Ethan, though physically better, still carried a sense of urgency in his movements. The events of the past few days had clearly taken their toll on him, but Naomi could tell that his mind was still racing. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her heart. Ethan looked at her, his expression serious but soft. "We need to lay low for a while," he said, his voice hoarse from the strain. "I have a place we can go, somewhere they won't think to look for me. But it's not just about hiding. We need to make a plan to expose what they've done, what they're still doing. And we need to do it fast." Naomi nodded. "I'm with you," she said, her voice unwavering. "What's the next step?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before responding, as if weighing the risk of sharing too much. "I have documents," he said quietly. "Evidence of illegal activities, money laundering, shady deals. It's all in a secure location, but getting to it is going to be a challenge. These people have eyes everywhere." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. This was bigger than she had imagined. "And you think you can get to it without them stopping you?" she asked. Ethan gave a small, grim smile. "I have, too. I don't have much time." Naomi took a deep breath. She wasn't sure how much she had gotten herself into, but she knew that this wasn't just about Ethan anymore. This was about making sure that the people responsible for this didn't get away with it. "So, what's the plan to get the evidence?" she asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. Ethan turned toward her, his eyes filled with a new sense of determination. "I need you to help me get into the system," he said. "I have the access codes, but I'll need someone who can get past the security. You've been working in tech for a while, haven't you? You know how to handle that kind of thing." Naomi's stomach twisted. She had worked with technology before, but this was far different from anything she had done in the past. The stakes were higher now. The people Ethan was up against didn't play by the same rules. "I can help you," she said, her voice steady despite the unease she felt. "But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and they'll find us." Ethan nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know, but we don't have a choice. If we don't act now, everything I've built, everything I've worked for, will be gone. And they won't stop until they've destroyed everything. They'll come for you too, Naomi. You've seen it already." Naomi didn't say anything, but the truth in his words hit her like a ton of bricks. She had already crossed a line by helping him. There was no turning back now. She was in this, whether she liked it or not. The next few hours passed in a blur. Naomi and Ethan made their way to a small, unmarked building on the outskirts of town. Ethan led her through a series of locked doors and corridors, the place feeling colder and more foreboding with every step. Finally, they reached a small room with a single computer. Ethan walked over to the desk, tapping a few keys on the keyboard. Naomi stood in the doorway, watching as he worked. She could sense the weight of the situation pressing down on them. There was no turning back now. They were in too deep. As Ethan entered the final set of commands, the screen flickered to life, revealing a complex set of encrypted files. Naomi took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. She leaned in, her fingers flying over the keys as she began to crack the code. She had done this before, but never with so much on the line. Each keystroke felt like a countdown to something they couldn't undo. Ethan stood behind her, watching intently. The tension was palpable, but Naomi kept her focus. The system finally unlocked, revealing a series of damning documents and records. Naomi's eyes scanned the files, her heart sinking with every page she read. This was it. The proof they needed to bring down the people who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. She turned to Ethan, her voice low but filled with determination. "We have it," she said. "We've got what we need." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. For the first time in days, his shoulders relaxed, but the weight of the next steps was far from over. "We've got a long road ahead of us," he said, "but we're one step closer." Naomi looked at the documents on the screen, feeling a strange mix of triumph and fear. They had the evidence, but getting it to the right people, making sure it didn't disappear before it could be used, would be a battle in itself. She knew that now, more than ever, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The weight of the evidence on the screen felt almost too heavy to bear. Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind racing. They had it, the proof they needed to bring down the people who had been hiding in the shadows, manipulating the system for their own gain. But the question now was, what next? How could they expose the truth without putting themselves in even more danger? Ethan stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the screen, his body tense. He had been through a lot, but Naomi could see that the reality of what they had just unlocked was finally setting in. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a fight for everything he had built. Naomi turned to him, her voice low but firm. What's the plan now? Ethan let out a long breath. He had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, the weight of it felt almost unbearable. We get this to the authorities, he said, his voice steady. We expose everything. I have contacts in the government, in law enforcement, but we need to be careful. They won't want this to get out. If we move too quickly, it could all get erased before we can act. Naomi nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They couldn't afford any mistakes. And how do we make sure it doesn't disappear? She asked. Ethan's gaze was focused, his mind clearly already working through the next steps. We have to go public. We can't just hand it off and hope someone takes action. We need to make sure this story gets out, and fast. I'll use my connections, but we need to make sure the media is involved too. Naomi was quiet for a moment, her mind processing the enormity of what they were about to do. She had already helped Ethan once, but this was different. The stakes had never been higher. Are you sure you're ready for this? She asked, her voice a little softer now. Ethan's eyes met hers, and for the first time since they had started this journey together, Naomi saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. I don't have a choice, he said, his voice tinged with a quiet resolve. If we don't do this now, they'll get away with it, and they'll keep doing it to others. Naomi felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. This was more than just about Ethan's past mistakes. This was about preventing more harm from being done, about making sure that people who had been victimized by the corruption would finally have a chance at justice. She looked at the documents on the screen once more, the names, the dates, the undeniable evidence of the crimes that had been committed. The fight ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be dangerous. But Naomi knew one thing for sure. She couldn't back down now. She had already stepped into this world, and there was no turning back. Okay, she said, her voice steady now. Let's do it. Ethan gave her a small, appreciative smile. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with a quiet gratitude. I don't know how to repay you for this. Naomi shook her head. You don't have to. Just make sure this doesn't happen again. That's enough for me. They made their way out of the small office, and Naomi followed Ethan to the back of the building, where a car was waiting for them. It was time to put the plan into motion. As they drove through the streets of the city, Naomi couldn't help but think about how far they had come in such a short amount of time. Just a few days ago, she had been a waitress, going about her life as usual. Now, she was about to help expose one of the biggest corporate cover-ups in history. The thought made her head spin, but at the same time, she felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. Ethan was right. They didn't have a choice. It was time to make sure the truth was heard, no matter the cost. The car pulled up to a small, discreet building, and Naomi and Ethan got out. They were about to meet someone who could help them get the story out. Naomi wasn't sure who this person was, but she trusted Ethan's judgment. He led her inside, and the dimly lit room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. A man sat behind a desk, his face obscured by shadows. He looked up as they entered, his eyes flicking from Ethan to Naomi. You brought it, he asked, his voice low. Ethan nodded, handing over a flash drive containing the evidence they had uncovered. It's all there, he said. Make sure it gets out, fast. The man nodded, not saying much more. He didn't need to. He knew the gravity of the situation. Naomi stood beside Ethan, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The evidence was in the right hands now, and the truth was about to come to light. Ethan looked at her, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. No matter what happens, we did the right thing, he said softly. Naomi nodded. We're doing this together. They watched as the man behind the desk plugged the flash drive into his computer, preparing to send the files to the right people. The tension in the room was palpable, but Naomi knew that they had taken the first step in what would be a long, dangerous battle. But they were ready. They had to be. The room was tense as Naomi and Ethan watched the man at the desk click through the files on the flash drive. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft tapping of keys as the man worked quickly. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest. She had done everything she could to help Ethan get to this point, but now, it was out of her hands. There was nothing left to do but wait. Ethan stood beside her, his expression unreadable, but Naomi could feel the weight of the moment in the air. This wasn't just about the files. This was about everything they had fought for. The man at the desk finally looked up, his face grim. It's done, he said simply. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaky. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he swiveled in his chair, turning his computer screen toward them. On the screen were headlines flashing across various news outlets. Headlines Naomi had only dreamed of seeing. The story was out. The corruption, the cover-up, the money laundering, it was all there for the world to see. "It's already been shared with the media," the man explained, his voice low. "It's everywhere now. You did it." Naomi couldn't believe it. She had known the stakes were high, but seeing the story go live was a reality she hadn't fully prepared for. Ethan stood next to her, his expression still unreadable, but Naomi could see the relief washing over him. He had spent so long hiding, so long protecting his empire from the truth. Now, it was out in the open. "We did it," Ethan said softly, almost to himself. Naomi nodded, but the gravity of it all began to settle in. There was no turning back now. They had exposed the people who had been hiding behind a mask of power, and they couldn't undo what had just been set in motion. The consequences would be massive. The phone on the desk buzzed suddenly, interrupting their thoughts. The man at the desk answered it immediately, speaking in a low, urgent voice. Naomi and Ethan exchanged a look, knowing that the storm was far from over. They had taken down the corporate giants, but the real battle was just beginning. As the man hung up the phone, he turned to them. "You've got to move quickly," he warned. "The people you've exposed won't go down without a fight. They'll try to bury this, and they'll come after anyone who gets in their way." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on the mission, on getting the truth out, that she hadn't fully considered what would come next. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We stay one step ahead," the man replied. "You'll need protection, and you'll need to disappear for a while. This isn't over." Ethan looked at Naomi, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something darker, fear. "I never thought it would come to this," he admitted quietly. Naomi could hear the weight of his words. She didn't know what he had gone through to get to this point, but she understood now. He had been fighting for so long, against so many powerful forces. And now, they had taken the first step to bring it all to light. "We're in this together," Naomi said firmly. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since they had met, Naomi saw a glimpse of something she hadn't seen before, a man who was tired of running. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "We've come this far, and we're not stopping now." Naomi nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known from the moment she helped him that this would change everything. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and there was no going back. But as she stood there, side by side with Ethan, watching the world change around them, she knew one thing. This was just the beginning. The fight for the truth was far from over, but they had started it. And they weren't going to stop until justice was done. The man at the desk stood up, grabbing his coat. "I'll make sure you're safe for now," he said, his voice businesslike. "But you've got to stay alert. Don't trust anyone right now." Naomi and Ethan exchanged another look. They knew this wasn't over. They knew the people behind the corruption would stop at nothing to cover their tracks, but they had done what they came to do. They had exposed the truth. And now, they would fight to make sure it stayed out in the open. As they walked out of the building, the night air felt different. The weight of the world seemed a little lighter, but Naomi knew that the storm was far from over. But whatever happened next, she was ready. They were ready. In this gripping black story, a waitress finds herself thrust into a dangerous world when she helps a bleeding man escape his enemies during a powerful storm. Little does she know, the man is a ruthless billionaire CEO on the run from dangerous people who will stop at nothing to silence him. As she helps him recover, Naomi becomes deeply involved in exposing a corrupt system that has been hidden for years. With the truth now out, Naomi and the CEO must navigate the perilous aftermath, where their every move is being watched. As secrets are revealed, Naomi realizes that she's not just helping a man in need, but fighting against a powerful force that could ruin them both. This black story unravels layers of betrayal, justice, and survival, where Naomi and Ethan fight together to ensure the truth is heard. With the stakes higher than ever, they face the dangerous repercussions of their actions, knowing they can never go back to the lives they once had. The journey is far from over, and as more black stories unfold, the truth becomes their weapon, but also the very thing that could destroy them. This thrilling black story takes you through the highs and lows of taking down corruption and uncovering hidden truths in the face of overwhelming odds.